everyone. It is another episode of the New Stack Makers. And today we are talking about cloud security, cloud native security in particular, in advance of the Prisma by Palo Alto Networks Cloud Native Security Summit that will be coming up in June. They've been doing a lot of research, and we're going to hear a little bit about it, some glimpses into it, and it may be compelling enough, I hope at least, for you to think about attending. And so joining us for our conversation, we have Keith Mokris, Head of Product Marketing at Prisma Cloud, Palo Alto Networks. I'd also like to introduce Mark Rauchwarter, Security Consulting Senior Manager, Cloud and Infrastructure Security at Accenture Security. Keith and Mark, I understand you've been doing some research, and you also had Amazon Web Services joining you in this research. And we all know the time is now for better security. We know it's more than ever that we're looking at container technologies and those attack services really having spread far and wide, as we all know. And so you're hosting this Cloud Native Security Summit, and you'll be presenting the findings of this research you did with Amazon Web Services and Mark with your team from Accenture. So my questions really are about the surveying that you've been doing of these cloud architects, these info security veterans, these DevOps professionals. Why do this research in the first place? What does it have to offer, the community that you'll be talking about when you present it in June?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the reasons is you've really seen, regardless of where you look, that cloud native architectures, DevOps and DevSecOps practices have really become a central pillar of infrastructure and operations strategy. And so I think a lot of people know that this market is taking off when it comes to all of this different infrastructure. And now we want to quantify that so we can better understand, how users and how customers are actually building and deploying, running and protecting their applications.
Mark, what are your thoughts on why this security research is still important?
Yeah, so one of the things that really resonates with our clients a lot of times is they want to know what everybody else is doing. They want to understand where they are on their journey, where they should be along on their journey, what additional items they should be looking at that they're maybe not looking at yet, and try to understand what it means to them. So having this information while we as Accenture talk to a lot of different clients and are able to pull in a lot of that information, this is a great resource to understand more what else is going on out there broader than what Accenture hears.
So what is it that you actually have found just from a very high level? What is the research finding? One anecdote maybe that strikes you that gives a glimpse into what makes this time of interest?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, one of the interesting findings that I've seen so far is that a number of individuals think they're better than they may actually be on their journey. And we're starting to see some of that information come in from as results of the survey. And some of the survey questions were positioned in such a way that we could understand that information, understand what they think is occurring within their organizations, but also tease out some of that additional information to see if that's actually what's happening. And we're starting to see some interesting results in that regard.
Anything else, Keith, there?
Yeah, I think, one of the favorite areas that I really want to dig into as more research comes in is better understanding the wide range of challenges that organizations are facing in moving their workloads and applications to the cloud. I think it's a really diverse set of responses that we've gotten so far, including, personnel that you have at your organization, expertise and training about these different architectures and how you can implement them properly, as well as potentially the maturity of your organization, do you have a lot of legacy applications, or have you been able to take advantage of being more, kind of this born in the cloud identity? If you're, essentially a newer company. And so what we're really seeing is there's a huge range of challenges that organizations are facing. And again, mapped to the different, kind of response data. It's really interesting.
Does everybody need cloud native security now? Is it, and does everyone think that they need it? Or do they believe that they need it and think that they know it? I mean, what is the kind of general consensus you were finding, even outside of this survey, that research that you're doing? I find the more I talk to people, the more I find out little things such as, the pros and cons of vulnerability scanners, right? What is actually an effective vulnerability scanner versus one that's ineffective? What is it that needs to take action? What should be automated? It seems like there's this wide range of unknowns, but I'm wondering even if people are aware of that.
Again, the number one takeaway I find is that every organization is ultimately on some sort of journey to the cloud. And when I talk about kind of some initial best practices for securing cloud native applications, one of my favorite places to start is showing someone a Docker file. And I essentially love to present, 10 to 15 lines of code. And then I ask the question, looking at this Docker file, is this secure or not? Would it meet your organization's compliance policies? And this is just a Docker file that I went out to, either Docker Hub or GitHub and pulled onto my machine. And I think that really, clearly shows how you need the right tools in order to understand, these new architectural paradigms. And obviously, when you start to have hundreds or thousands of container images, then you really start thinking about some of the other challenges. Scale, leveraging automation, as you're probably not going to add a huge number of security personnel as your architectures grow. Or how do you ensure that everyone at your organization can, implement security effectively? And so I feel like we recognize now that these toolkits are really providing a lot of opportunities, but also come with a lot of challenges.
Yeah, and I would echo that as well. Every client is on some sort of a cloud journey. Some are further along than others. Some are doing simple lift and shift of their existing infrastructure from the data centers into clouds, and some are going after more of the cloud native type development. But what we're seeing is a number of those clients are struggling with making sure that what they're doing in the cloud and what they're developing in the cloud environments is truly secure. And they're looking for tools, partners, a number of different capabilities to add to their development processes to make sure that they're addressing all of the required security needs just to keep their company safe, but also to make sure that their applications are robust and still meet the needs of the business.
I get this image in my head, Keith, of you showing this Docker container and looking under a microscope, and there's all these bugs just like swarming all over the place. And you're like, oh, stand back. But it is one of my sometimes, isn't it?
Exactly. And we tell organizations all the time, whether it's, step one, I think, is certainly addressing kind of vulnerability or compliance management. Just how do you configure all of these components that you're building and deploying? But we warn people all the time, if you haven't, done a lot of vulnerability scanning before, that's really going to be, a several month process to start embedding security controls, getting control of your environment from those kind of initial developer and DevOps teams that race to adopt some of these technologies. And so it can be a really big, daunting task for organizations.
Yeah, I think too about the people out there who have to convince others, like, hey, this is a problem. This is an issue. And they're like, well, show me what you got. Show me what, prove it. I'm developing just fine. I don't know what the problem is. So will this research help address that for that person? And like, what will the person be able to come back and say, hey, here's what I found. Here's what I got. Mark?
I think in some ways it will. It'll help to shed additional light on where everybody is at in terms of what levels of protections they're putting in place. We certainly, when we have conversations with our clients, run up against the understanding that they think it's good enough what they have. And we're walking them through that process and really starting to show them some of the security vulnerabilities that they may have in something that they think is good is a great way that we help them to understand what it is that they need to focus on to improve their security posture.
Yeah, I think one of the big, discussion points that, I certainly remind organizations about, if you're a security person who hasn't had a lot of visibility into some of these initial projects that might have been happening at your org, you can't respond and you can't protect what you can't see. And so you might feel really confident where you've been involved in, bringing new architectures to the cloud where you've had a lot of security visibility. But then it's not uncommon for organizations to uncover, new apps or other teams that they haven't worked with before. And so I think it can even be a spectrum inside an organization based on how involved security's been from the get-go.
But what about those security people? Are they really in charge anymore? Do you have any research that shows what their role is and what their importance is? Because engineers, they control an awful lot these days. I mean, who has the keys right now, to a configuration? Is it the security person or is it the engineer? So it must create some tension there. So I'm not so convinced it's as much about the security pro anymore.
So in some cases, the engineer truly does have the control. And part of our hope and desire is to make sure that we're embedding security into those processes. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to understand as well from these survey results, is to see how many organizations are on that process of shifting security left in the process, embedding security, making it part of the development process, rather than something that they're constantly battling each other for who's right, the developer, the security person, and making sure that it's cohesive.
Yeah, I think Mark really nailed it there. I think developers, DevOps engineers, they are certainly in the driver's seat in this new world of cloud native architectures. But at the same time, security has a lot of responsibility. They ultimately own, potential breaches, misconfigurations, or, compliance audits. So they certainly at least want to gather visibility, and embedding security controls, I think, is, going to be a huge part of this research.
So for those who go to the event, there might be a security person there. There might be an engineering manager there. So, what is it that the engineering manager needs to know as much as the security manager does? And do the survey results reflect upon that? Because I could see the engineering manager as much as the security manager going and say, you know what? I'm not holding a piece of paper right now, but you can go online. I want to show you something. He's like, I want to show you something too. So where will that intersection be, do you think? I mean, is that part of the research that you're trying to find out? So these people who represent different aspects of the organization really have some understanding of like where they fit in the whole story, so they can communicate better?
I definitely think so. One of the key questions that we asked as we talked about some of the challenges in moving to the cloud and adopting cloud native architectures, one of the responses that's shown pretty high so far in the initial survey results is training. How many organizations have internal training on best practices, regardless of whether you're a developer or DevOps engineer or a security practitioner? And so I think one of the key takeaways we hope in sharing best practices and peeling back some of this research is just bringing these business groups together so they can get more cross-functional and share those best practices internally as well. because I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's helping to educate the developers and the engineers that what they're creating is so important to helping the organization remain protected and not compromising customer data, and not being part of one of those breaches that we hear happening all too often these days.
Cloud workloads. We hear a lot about the cloud, but we don't often hear about the workloads and how they're associated with a container, or how they may actually be a container. They might be a web server. It could be an application. It could be a service. Do you look through the workload matter in this research? Are you looking to try to find some trends, and maybe you can provide us some glimpse of that so people can get a perspective on, what are some of the, kind of understanding that you're hoping to provide here for people?
I think we are definitely trying to understand where individuals and organizations are creating their applications and creating the systems that support their enterprises. And so that is some of the information that we're eager to hear back about on, are they still looking towards the more traditional monolithic application development, utilizing some of the workloads in the more traditional virtual machines or platform as a service type solutions? Or are they looking more for futuristic and adopting some of those newer microservices, such as the container technologies, as well as serverless computing?
But container technologies are not futuristic anymore, are they?
For some organizations, they are. For some of the conversations that we have with clients, they are very much still in a very traditional model. They may be in an industry that doesn't quite move as fast. Some other industries tend to adopt technology quicker and incorporate that within their business processes, whereas some industries move much slower along that process. So we are still helping some to even the initial discussion on, should I utilize containers? That is, it's new for some, not quite for everyone.
So are you finding that people lack training in this space? If they don't even know about container technologies, then they really don't know anything about cloud native technologies.
I think there are definitely some limitations on what we're seeing from clients in terms of the information and understanding that they do have. Again, it's on a spectrum. Some organizations are more mature in this area, and they have been adopting containers, and they are on a good path. And so they are looking more towards some of the newer things like running functions or serverless type workloads within the cloud. But again, some of them, they have been focused on just supporting the business. Budgets have been cut in the last several years for some organizations as well. So they've just been trying to maintain and haven't been able to adopt and learn some of these new technologies.
So Keith, if you're thinking about that spectrum, who's at the heart of that spectrum, who you'd want to see, like in this, who's ever listening to our show, for all you listeners out there, who would raise their hand right now and say, oh, yeah, that's me. I'm right in the heart of that. I'm right in the center of that spectrum. Who are those people?
Wow, it's so tough to break down in a really simple way. One of the things I continue to be amazed by, in the time I've been, really focusing on cloud native in this space, I'm continually shocked at how almost, the leaders in every industry vertical are continuing to move to cloud native architectures. And one of the things I continue to see as organizations start thinking more about security, as they start talking about the architectures they have in front of them today, they're thinking more and more about what things will look like in the future. So today, if they have a certain number of cloud VMs and then a certain number of containerized applications, they know that as they look at security tooling, implementing best practices and training, they know they're eventually going to be using serverless, whether it's a true function platform or other event-driven types of platforms like AWS Fargate, where you have a task definition that's not quite, fully kind of open source container platform, but it still has a lot of those constructs that are part of it. And so it's almost like a lot of organizations are somewhere along that spectrum, knowing that they're going to be moving and progressing, sometime in the near future if they aren't already. And that's what's interesting from my view.
That's pretty interesting, actually, perspective there on, on how people are fitting into the spectrum overall. But when you start to look at, for instance, like tool adoption, it must be kind of all over the board, and there must be some companies that are like using just all kinds of tools and others that are not. And I know your research looks into this. I mean, I think this is actually pretty interesting, and how people are thinking about tools. What do you think is going to change their perspective about tooling, or maybe just help them think it through a bit more about the tools that they use?
So I think one of the core considerations with tooling, there's no perfect give me everything I want in one perfect package. While organizations may know some of the architectures they want to implement, you can't buy it completely off the shelf in a perfect box. You need to build scripting. You need to build some automation components. You have the underlying compute, and then you have the runtime. You have networking components. And so every organization has an initial group of applications that they may migrate, or it may be a lift and shift effort. But then as you start moving to other architectures, maybe you start to shift some of your toolkit. And so there's a lot of organizations that can really lead to piling on a lot of tools, which can create some good opportunities and then also some challenges. So I think it's clear there's no perfect road forward.
I totally agree. Every client, every organization has a different way of looking at their security, and what security is important to them, what they need to protect. So they adopt a variety of different tool sets. So there doesn't tend to be one that fits all of the different use cases that they need and are looking to protect. But there are definitely new tools coming, and that are out there that help to bring in a number of those features. So we would be interested to see if there's potentially opportunities at reducing and simplifying the overall security tool landscape.
I think about also the architectures that people are responsible for, and virtualization, for instance, has been predominant in most IT organizations. There's far more virtualized environments than there are bare metal environments. I might be wrong there, but it sure is apparent that virtualization really is a key aspect of the enterprise. But the virtualization that we see from past days historically has been about virtualizing the server, virtualizing the application. It's not necessarily been about virtualizing at the component layer where you're virtualizing the actual, the container as a process, not even a virtualization, more of a process more than anything else. And so, how do these results reflect the architectural decisions that people have made and help them with some insights?
No, I was just going to say that's one of the core questions of our survey. And like Mark mentioned earlier, I think every organization certainly wants to compare themselves to their peers to kind of see where they stand in this new world. Regardless of whether they're doing things right or wrong, it's really nice to have that comparison to understand, potentially your maturity curve or where you are on this journey. I find it especially interesting too, as a lot of organizations have a lot of different initiatives when it comes to architectures. And some organizations that I think are really mature are empowering developers and DevOps teams to essentially choose the best practice or the best architecture for their own app modernization efforts. And then security will essentially be really agile and versatile in working with them as they get closer to building and deploying their final application architecture. So ultimately, those are some statistics that I'm really looking forward to digging into.
Just in closing then, what is it in particular that our listeners should know about why they would want to attend this upcoming virtual summit? What is compelling about this research that they will find of value that they can use, that they can provide as perspective for themselves and their teams and their companies or organizations?
I think from my perspective, one of the items that we get a lot of questions on, as I touched on before, is understanding where each of our organizations are at along the journey and comparing ourselves to the others. Are we behind the curve? Are we ahead of the curve? Are we totally missing something that we should actually be focusing on? And I think the results from this information will definitely pull out that more, and they'll be able to understand and take some hopefully actionable items away from it back to their organizations as to areas that they should focus on.
I completely agree. I think one of the big challenges you see as orgs leverage more cloud native architectures is trying to create some sort of a goalpost or metric in their success. And these efforts have a cost, not just financially, but also in personnel, also in time when it comes to training and obviously change management and focusing on these, again, lift and shift or app modernization efforts. So I think the more data organizations can gather up front, the better they can sometimes approach some of these really challenging scenarios.
Will it help them speed up at all? Information's moving so fast now. The internet is more important than ever. We're all sitting in places that are outside of our offices. The acceleration in open source communities is really apparent. We're seeing downstream, though, less speed and less ability to move as fast. Is this at all what you want to help people with? Help them move faster? Because it's going to be imperative no matter where you are on the spectrum, if you've heard of containers or not.
Definitely. Moving faster. We are, of course, in a different world right now, and probably will be for some time going forward. And one of the things that we try and help our clients understand is if they put the investment in now, they look at what is going to have the greatest impact for their organizations, they can actually save money in the long run. There's a lot of opportunity to do that if you do it correctly. So that would be one of the key points.
Keith, I'm sure you agree with that to some extent, but is there any other perspective you can provide?
No, I definitely do. I think we want organizations to certainly, move as quickly as they possibly can, as they have a lot of these initiatives already underway. But at the same time, we want to be able to do it with a lot of accuracy and precision. So you're not doubling back on your efforts, 3, 6, 12 months down the road. So the more data you have now, the more informed you can be to make decisions that are lasting for your organization. And I think that's one of the keys.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for both of your time today. I've been joined by Keith Mokris, as Head of Product Marketing, Prisma Cloud, Palo Alto Networks, and Mark Rauchwarter, Security Consulting Senior Manager, Cloud and Infrastructure Security at Accenture Security. You did this research with Amazon Web Services. We look forward to reporting the findings and discussing them at your summit, which is, Keith, maybe you can share the date with everyone.
June 24th, next month.
Great. We look forward to seeing you there, and listeners out there and viewers. Hope you can make it, but I'll let you be the judge. It looks to me like there's some compelling information there that can actually be of value and help in decision-making and just general explanation analysis. So thank you both, Keith and Mark, for joining us, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.